A billionaire's mistress demanded a divorce from his pregnant wife, but she had other plans. A single spark can unleash a storm of chaos, especially when betrayal and greed clash in the glittering halls of the city's elite. In this story, what looked like a flawless marriage teeters on the edge when an ambitious mistress wants more than secret encounters. She wants the wife gone. But she has no idea what she's up against. That wife is anything but naive, and she refuses to bend to some flashy ultimatum. Beneath crystal chandeliers, secrets twist, and a careful plan slowly forms in the shadows. One betrayal might open the gates to ruin, but how you fight back is what truly matters. Charlotte Alden once believed in fairy tale endings. She could still picture her wedding day like a classic movie scene. White lilies filling the church air with their sweet scent, her diamond-studded gown catching every beam of light, and her husband Graham Alden glowing with pride. Everyone had said they were the perfect match, and for a while she believed it too. At first, everything was bliss. Graham, a renowned venture capitalist, famous for turning small companies into global giants, had brought Charlotte into a life of private galas and five-star nights at luxury hotels like the Peninsula in Chicago. She was his anchor, he always told her, the calm center of his relentless ambition. He'd whisk her away to exclusive events at the Art Institute, impressing everyone with his charm and polished generosity. But beneath that shiny surface, small cracks formed. Subtle changes crept in. Late nights at the office turned routine, missed calls piled up, and an uneasy feeling nagged at Charlotte's heart. Graham had always been driven, but now there was a chill in the way he looked at her, like half his thoughts were somewhere else. Months before the truth broke open, Charlotte forced a bright smile at parties, pretending not to notice the lingering looks some of Graham's colleagues gave her. A wife's intuition is rarely wrong. She didn't know just how deep her suspicions would cut once they were confirmed. But every life-shifting storm starts with one drop. For Charlotte, that drop came as a call from an unknown number, late on a Friday night when her phone buzzed to life with a blocked caller ID. She was curled up in her reading nook, a cushioned armchair by the bay window, overlooking her carefully tended garden. The phone's sharp vibration startled her. For a second, she thought about ignoring it, but something tugged at her, an urge she couldn't explain. "Hello?" Charlotte said softly. Silence, then a woman's voice, low, assured. "Is this Charlotte Alden?" Charlotte's heartbeat stumbled. "Yes, may I ask who's calling?" The voice was sharp and smooth at once, radiating confidence. "I'm Camille Graham." She paused, just long enough for Charlotte's pulse to thunder in her ears. Camille's next words confirmed every fear Charlotte had buried deep. "Let's just say, I'm someone important to him." Charlotte felt the blood drain from her face. So this was it. The truth she'd half suspected, half prayed she'd imagined. Camille cleared her throat. "I'd like to meet. There's something you deserve to hear, and trust me, we're better off saying it face to face." One trembling hand clutched the phone tighter, the other gripped the armrest. Charlotte fought to keep her voice steady. "Are you saying you and Graham are having an affair?" "If you need me to spell it out, yes," Camille said, a bite creeping into her tone. "I'm done hiding. Meet me tomorrow at La Rue in downtown Chicago, noon. I'll text you the details." The line went dead. Charlotte lowered the phone, breath caught halfway in her throat. Her entire body turned cold, so it was real. She sat frozen, her hands pressed to her cheeks, her mind racing. The flawless life she'd fought so hard to hold together had finally cracked wide open. Morning came uneasy. Sunlight seeped through sheer curtains, while Charlotte dressed carefully in simple black trousers and a cream silk blouse. A pair of small pearl studs glimmered at her ears, neither too humble nor too showy. It felt like walking onto a battlefield, but she'd walk in with her head high. Inside La Rue, she spotted Camille instantly. The woman radiated curves and crimson lipstick, poured into an emerald dress meant to turn heads. Even in the restaurant's quiet sophistication, Camille glittered like a jewel under a spotlight. Charlotte forced a polite smile and stepped to the table where Camille sat, swirling a glass of white wine. The hostess gave Charlotte a discreet nod as she took her seat across from the other woman. "I was half afraid you wouldn't show," Camille said, voice calm as she twisted her wine glass by the stem. "I need answers," Charlotte said quietly, ignoring the untouched menu in front of her. Charlotte spoke softly, ignoring the untouched menu placed in front of her. Camille leaned forward, folding her arms on the table. I've been with Graham for almost a year now, Camille said, her tone smooth and sharp. He promised me a lot of things: love, security, a life where I wouldn't have to hide. Frankly, I'm done waiting. Charlotte felt her throat close up. Had it really been that long? Memories flashed behind her eyes. Nights when Graham came home late, reeking of expensive cologne, the faint trace of lipstick on his shirt collar. She had buried every suspicion, forced herself not to see what was in plain sight. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she held them back. A quiet, punishing thought slid through her chest. Did I drive him away? Was I too busy, too naive? Did I stop being enough? The doubt stung worse than Camille's venomous words. Camille pressed on, unmoved. He keeps me in the shadows because he's scared. He says it's about his reputation, his business deals, but really, he's scared of you. A bitter laugh broke through Charlotte's tight chest. Afraid of me? I'm just his wife. Camille's lips curled into a sly smile. You're more than that. You're respected. You have a name and influence. And let's not pretend. Your father sat on the city council for years. A lot of Graham's clout comes from you. You're no small obstacle. Charlotte's gaze dropped. It was true. She had always hated being seen as a piece on someone's chessboard, a connection to leverage. This conversation felt like a nightmare she'd stumbled into, scripted by someone else. So, Charlotte asked, her voice barely above a whisper, what exactly do you want me to do? Camille didn't hesitate. Divorce him. Let him go so I can have him openly. Name your price. She leaned back, utterly unbothered. I know most of your money is tied up in trusts and investments, but we can work something out. Something inside Charlotte snapped. The arrogance, the cruelty, the way this woman dissected her life like it was just another deal to close. She had come here bracing for heartbreak, but she hadn't expected this cold demand. Charlotte lifted her chin. My marriage isn't a business contract you can renegotiate. If Graham wants a divorce, he can ask for it himself. Camille's expression shifted, her smug confidence tightening into mild irritation. He won't. He's too much of a coward. She tilted her head, voice dropping low. But I'm not. I came here, woman to woman, to make this clear. Charlotte's pulse thundered so loud she could hardly hear herself think. She swallowed hard. I'll talk to him tonight. Without waiting for a response, Charlotte stood up and walked away, refusing to give Camille the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Outside, storm clouds gathered overhead as she left the restaurant, each step echoing like a warning of what was about to unravel. She drove home, her eyes scanning every corner of the quiet neighborhood, as if somewhere in the familiar streets she might find a sign of what came next. Graham was nowhere to be found, probably in a board meeting, or worse, with Camille again. Charlotte paced the living room, fury boiling under her skin. But beneath the fury coiled something more treacherous, a tiny, gnawing dread that maybe she hadn't been enough. Had she grown boring? Predictable? She hated herself for even wondering. When Graham finally returned later that evening, he carried himself with casual ease, his tailored suit still crisp, hair neatly styled. He paused in the foyer, surprise flickering across his face when he saw her standing there, arms folded tight across her chest. Is something wrong? He asked, setting his briefcase down. Where have you been? Charlotte's tone cut like ice. He frowned slightly. Meetings. Why? She drew in a breath, steadying her voice so it wouldn't crack. I met Camille today. That name sliced through Graham's polished calm like a knife. His face darkened and the act fell away. You had no right, he started, then caught himself. How did you? She called me, Charlotte snapped, her voice trembling with rage she could barely contain. She told me everything. A year, Graham. A whole year of lying to my face, of humiliating me in this marriage. He stepped closer, voice low but urgent. I never meant to hurt you. It just happened. The pathetic cliché made Charlotte want to scream. She forced herself to stand still, even as her words shook. She wants me to divorce you. His frustration cracked through. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing in front of her. You think she can just waltz in here and replace you? Is that what you think I want? He paused, searching her face as if scrambling for an excuse. Charlotte, listen to me. I got carried away. At first it was just physical, but now she thinks. She thinks she owns you now, Charlotte finished for him, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. Graham, you were everything to me. We built this life, this name, this future, together. If you wanted out, you could have told me. He reached for her hand, but she pulled back sharply. Charlotte, please. You have to understand, I needed something more. Our marriage felt stale. I know that doesn't make it right, but she almost laughed, a broken, bitter sound caught in her chest. How many nights had she spent planning charity galas while he was planning betrayal? How blind had she been? No more excuses. She hissed through clenched teeth. If you want a divorce, just say it. Don't send your mistress to negotiate for you. Graham exhaled, looking truly worn for the first time that night. I'm under a lot of pressure right now. There's a huge merger on the table. If any of this leaks, it could cost the company millions. Charlotte shook her head, bitter disbelief tightening her chest. Your empire. That's all you care about now, isn't it? We used to be a team, Graham. Now, it's just your money and your reputation. He hesitated, his eyes flicking nervously toward the staircase. I don't want to lose everything I've worked for. I just need more time to think. Let me deal with Camille. I'll fix this. Charlotte stared at him, a sick wave of disgust churning in her gut. Time. After a year of betrayal, he still had the nerve to beg for more time. You'd better fix it fast, Graham, because if you don't, I swear I'll be the one to make sure you lose everything. And I mean everything. She brushed past him, the burn of betrayal driving every step. If he thought she would quietly disappear and surrender what was hers, he was in for the rudest awakening of his life. Darkness swallowed her bedroom that night. Charlotte stood at the window, staring out at Chicago's skyline. 1,000 city lights sparkling like distant secrets. Each light told a story. Hers felt stained beyond repair. She thought back to the early days, when love was still simple. Graham would surprise her with tickets to the symphony, or they'd stroll hand in hand along the Riverwalk after midnight, whispering about building a life untouched by the shallow power games of their old money families. Now those memories tasted bitter on her tongue. Graham cared about reputation above all else. The Alden name was stamped across charity galas, corporate mergers, scholarships bearing their family crest. Charlotte had lent her own social currency, her father's political ties, her polished grace at fundraisers, helping Graham's empire climb higher than either of them could have alone. She once believed they were true partners, that her poise balanced his drive. How naive she'd been. And then there was Camille, brazen, flawless, bold enough to march in and demand a divorce like it was a casual deal. Did Camille really love Graham, or just crave the power that came with becoming Mrs. Alden? Tears welled again, but Charlotte forced them back. Somewhere deep inside her, something turned cold and sharp as ice. She would not be cast aside from the life she had poured herself into. She would make sure both Camille and Graham learned, once and for all, that she was not some disposable ornament to be replaced at their convenience. Still, uncertainty hovered like a shadow. What move could she make? How could she protect her place without tearing herself apart in the process? As dawn crept in, Charlotte's mind drifted to the vows she once believed were unshakable, and a single question burned through her thoughts. What would it take to make them both pay? The next morning, she braced herself and drove to her father's stately townhouse. Richard Whitmore had once held a seat on Chicago's city council, and though he'd long stepped back from politics, his influence and connections were anything but dormant. Charlotte had never imagined asking for his network. It felt manipulative, too cold-blooded. But now everything had changed. "You look pale, sweetheart," Richard said the moment she stepped into his study, a warm, book-lined room filled with leather chairs and mementos from decades in city politics. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing in concern. "What's wrong?" She hesitated, then forced the words out. "I'm not well, Dad. Graham has been cheating on me." A muscle in Richard's jaw twitched. He reached out, wrapping her hand in his. "I always questioned that man's priorities. What do you need me to do?" Charlotte met her father's steady gaze. The words almost stuck in her throat. She hated this. Hated that she looked like the daughter who couldn't keep her own marriage together. A quiet shame pricked her spine. Am I a disappointment now? She forced the thought down. I'm not sure yet, but I need your help and your discretion, if I decide to. She stopped, the word catching in her throat. If I decide to divorce him, I want to know exactly what my options are. How to protect myself. Richard squeezed her hand reassuringly. You have my full support, no matter what you choose. When she left her father's townhouse, Charlotte felt a flicker of calm. She had resources, she had leverage, and knowledge, she reminded herself, was power. She wouldn't make any reckless moves, but she'd be ready. And the more she replayed Camille's shameless ultimatum, the more her anger hardened into sharp, deliberate resolve. Maybe the best way to fight an open threat was with a hidden snare. Days passed in tense quiet. Graham tiptoed around her, carefully avoiding Camille's name. Charlotte poured her energy into charity boards and volunteered for the Art Institute's community program, outwardly calm, impeccably poised. But each time her phone buzzed, her pulse jolted. Then, one afternoon, that same blocked number lit up her screen again. She was halfway through a meeting about an upcoming charity auction at the Drake Hotel. Murmuring a quick excuse, she slipped into a quiet hallway. Yes, she said tightly. Camille's voice crackled through the line, dripping with thinly veiled irritation. I gave you time to talk to Graham. What's the delay? Are you ready to discuss the divorce? Charlotte drew in a sharp breath. You don't get to dictate my life, Camille. A cold, humorless laugh echoed on the other end. The line hissed in her ear. You still don't get it, do you? He doesn't love you anymore. Every time he's with me, he complains about how cautious you are, how dull, how you can't keep him. A sharp sting of anger curled in Charlotte's gut, but she forced her voice to stay flat. Graham can say that to my face if he has the nerve. Camille's laugh was razor sharp. Please, he's terrified of your father's influence. Everyone knows that. But if you want your proof straight from the source, how about you join me at the Drake Hotel next week during the charity auction? I promise you'll get all the confirmation you need. Before Charlotte could answer, the line went dead. A wave of hot frustration tore through her chest. She pressed a hand to her collarbone, forcing her breathing to steady. Camille was setting up a scene, a public trap to humiliate her, corner her in front of Chicago's upper crust. But Charlotte would not be blindsided. She drew a deep breath, adjusted her expression, and rejoined the charity planning committee, her mind racing through every possible countermove. When the night of the auction arrived, the Drake Hotel's grand ballroom had been transformed into a glittering oasis. A string quartet played beneath sweeping crystal chandeliers, while Chicago's elite mingled, whispered bids on priceless artwork, and clinked champagne flutes. Charlotte stepped through the grand double doors in a sleek midnight blue gown with a modest high neckline and a subtle train that trailed elegantly behind her. Her hair was pinned into an immaculate chignon, diamond earrings flickering with every turn of her head. She could feel eyes following her, some sympathetic, some full of gossip. Rumors had already started to swirl, and she knew it. Across the room, Graham stood among a circle of business leaders, looking every bit the charming mogul in a crisp black tuxedo. The moment he caught sight of her, he excused himself and crossed the floor, tension rippling in the set of his shoulders. Charlotte, he murmured, forcing a warm, easy grin. You look breathtaking tonight. She accepted the compliment with a polite nod. We need to talk. But before he could respond, the buzz of conversation fractured as Camille appeared, making her entrance like a starlet on a stage. Draped in a scarlet gown that hugged every curve, she strolled forward, basking in the sharp attention her presence commanded. She paused just within reach, eyes flicking coyly between Charlotte and Graham as she raised a glass of champagne to her lips. Charlotte's pulse thudded hard. The triangle was complete, and people noticed. A ripple of hushed whispers danced through the room. Graham shot Camille a warning look, but she only tilted her head, her smile sharp and feline. I see you both made it, Camille purred, her voice dripping with sugary mockery. What a delightful surprise, Charlotte said evenly, finding her composure despite the eyes now drifting their way. Camille, this is neither the time nor the place for private affairs. Oh, I disagree, Camille countered smoothly, her tone carrying just enough bite to draw a few curious glances. I think this is the perfect backdrop. Donations flowing, champagne sparkling. What better way to show I'm serious about claiming my rightful place? Her eyes flicked to Graham, daring him. You do want me beside you, don't you? Graham shifted uneasily, voice low, his polished charm slipping. "Camille, stop. Not here." But Camille had no intention of stopping. She stepped closer to Charlotte, her perfume sharp and cloying. She dropped her voice to a venomous whisper. "I know about the trusts in your name, and the estate you inherited in Lake Forest. If you're smart, you'll sign the divorce papers and disappear quietly. Your father's pull won't save you if you're too stubborn to accept reality." Charlotte's eyes darted around the grand ballroom. Several guests pretended to admire paintings, but their prying ears were obvious. Heat crept up her neck, but she refused to flinch. She locked eyes with Camille, calm as polished steel. "You think you know everything about me, but you have no idea what I'm capable of." Camille arched an eyebrow, her smirk dripping poison. Bold words for a woman clinging to a dead marriage. In that instant, Charlotte understood. She couldn't afford rage or tears. She needed strategy, the same ruthless focus Graham wielded in boardrooms. She let a serene smile lift her lips. "Enjoy the rest of the auction. I'll see you both afterward." With that, she pivoted on her heel, spine straight, gown sweeping behind her like a silken threat. She would not make a scene tonight, but she would not leave this battlefield undefended either. The night was far from over. Her plan was just beginning to unfold. Slipping out of the ballroom's hum of music and gossip, Charlotte moved down a hushed corridor to a small plush lounge tucked behind velvet drapes. There, under the muted gold light, she pulled out her phone and dialed her father's private line. "Dad? It's me," she whispered. She laid out the situation in quick, controlled words, requesting one discreet favor she knew only Richard Whitmore could pull off cleanly. Richard's voice was grave but steady. "Are you certain about this, Charlotte? Once we set this in motion, there's no turning back." Her pulse hammered in her throat, but her reply was clear, steady, final. "I'm sure. It's the only way to protect myself and remind them both exactly who they underestimated." Ending the call, she drew a deep breath, her resolve sharpening like a blade. She wasn't entirely sure how each piece would fall into place, but she knew she had to move swiftly. This was unfamiliar territory, a high-stakes game with no room for missteps. Returning to the grand ballroom, Charlotte slipped effortlessly back into the role everyone expected. She mingled with donors, laughed lightly with old family friends, and radiated the polished charm of a devoted socialite wife. Beneath the flawless facade, however, her eyes swept the room again and again, searching for Graham and Camille, determined not to be blindsided. At last, she found them standing near a carved marble column. Camille was pressed in close to Graham, her posture dripping with possessiveness. Graham looked caught, face flushed with frustration and a hint of shame. Charlotte didn't move toward them. She knew she had already planted the seeds of suspicion and unease in both of them. Let them stew, she thought. Let them wonder what she'd do with Camille's bold threats. As the evening stretched on, the final auction items were claimed. Applause rang through the gilded ballroom, and Charlotte slipped away from the gathering, leaving a wake of whispered curiosity behind her. The stage was set. Now, she just had to wait for the next domino to fall. In the weeks that followed, Charlotte maintained a flawless front. She attended charity luncheons, hosted quiet afternoon teas with old friends, and even made carefully orchestrated public appearances with Graham. The tabloids gobbled it up, printing fresh photos of Chicago's golden couple, never suspecting the war brewing behind their mansion's closed doors. Meanwhile, Camille escalated her offensive. She left taunting voicemails on Charlotte's phone, forwarded snide text exchanges with Graham, and threatened to leak everything to the press. Charlotte saved each message, filing them away like ammunition. Beneath her calm exterior, she found an unfamiliar steadiness, powered by the fact that, quietly, she had begun securing her own finances and reinforcing her social standing without Graham's name attached. Graham, meanwhile, unraveled under Camille's relentless demands. He bounced between frantic meetings with his attorneys, desperate to figure out whether to rush a divorce or pay Camille off before she torched his spotless public image. He tried to placate Camille, but she had shed all pretense of discretion. She wanted the wife out. One evening, Graham cornered Charlotte in the study of their penthouse. The tall windows reflected the Chicago skyline back at them, the city's glow a harsh echo of the tension tightening the room. "What's your plan, Charlotte?" he demanded, voice clipped and strained. Camille's threatening to go public. She wants me to file for divorce immediately. If this breaks, it'll kill the deals I've been working on for months. Charlotte turned slowly from the window, meeting his eyes without flinching. Oh, so now you care what I think? Charlotte shot back, her words sharp enough to draw blood. Maybe you should have worried about consequences before you cheated on me for an entire year. Graham dragged a hand down his face, looking worn for the first time in forever. Charlotte, please. I know I've said it all before, but I need your help. Can't we settle this quietly? Her cold stare sliced through him. You want me to save you from the mess you made? How convenient. His voice rose, tinged with desperation. Yes, I know I'm selfish, I've been a damn fool, but please, let's figure out a settlement. I'll give you whatever you want, just don't blow this up. Charlotte let out a short, humorless laugh, the sound brittle as glass. Whatever I want? You really think this is just about money? She stepped closer, her voice like steel wrapped in silk. You humiliated me, Graham. You used me, my family, my connections to build your image, and now you expect me to disappear quietly while you parade your mistress around Chicago? He edged closer, hands half raised in a pacifying gesture. It's not like that. Look, I'm trying to negotiate. This is about protecting what we've built, my company, your reputation. Nobody wins if this blows up. Charlotte held his gaze, her expression unreadable. Inside, though, a storm raged. She could almost hear the echoes of every promise he'd ever whispered, promises that now felt cheap and hollow. Part of her wanted to shout, to hurl every cruel truth in his face, to see him squirm under the weight of what he'd done. But instead she buried it all under an icy mask, refusing to let him see the depth of her raw hurt. Then she spoke, her tone deadly calm. Be careful, Graham. You're standing on the edge of losing everything. And you're right. None of us wins if this goes up in flames. For a moment, neither said a word. The heavy hush of the study pressed in around them, broken only by the faint hum of the city beyond the windows. Then Charlotte brushed past him, her parting words cold and final. But maybe that's exactly what needs to happen. Charlotte's next move was to call in help from a source Graham would never expect. Elizabeth Ashcroft, a longtime ally of her father's, and one of Chicago's most feared divorce attorneys. Elizabeth was legendary for dismantling high-profile marriages with surgical precision and ensuring her clients walked away stronger than before. In Elizabeth's marble and mahogany office, Charlotte laid out every gritty detail of the affair, the threats, and Graham's pleas. Elizabeth listened, calm and hawk-eyed, nodding only when necessary. When Charlotte finished, Elizabeth leaned back, fingertips pressed together. You're in a very strong position, Charlotte. The courts tend to favor the betrayed spouse, especially when significant assets and a prenup are involved. His affair will weaken any leverage he thinks he has. Charlotte raised an eyebrow. We did sign a prenup, but it was straightforward, divided what each of us brought in. Elizabeth's eyes gleamed with quiet confidence. True, but you have far more than that. Your father's political influence, your own inheritance, your impeccable charity record. All of it frames you as the dignified victim and him as the reckless fool. All of that strengthens your position, Elizabeth said, her tone crisp, eyes sharp as a scalpel. And don't underestimate the weight of the evidence. The text messages, phone logs, even suspicious bank transfers. Adultery proven on paper will heavily tilt negotiations in your favor. Charlotte let out a slow breath. He keeps saying he wants to settle quickly to avoid scandal, but Camille is pushing him to force me out. She has no fear of going public. Elizabeth's smile was razor thin, the glint in her eyes unmistakable. Then let her. We'll counter with everything we have. And listen carefully. Under no circumstances do you sign a single page without my approval. If needed, I'll draft a counterclaim citing emotional distress and reputational harm. A strange but welcome wave of calm settled over Charlotte. She rose, shook Elizabeth's steady hand, and walked out of the towering law office more grounded than she'd felt in weeks. She finally had a legal ally capable of dismantling Camille's reckless threats, piece by piece. For the first time, the power felt squarely in her hands. As Camille's provocations escalated, new messages, new taunts, a final clash felt unavoidable. It came sooner than Charlotte expected. A terse text from Camille demanding they meet at a sleek cafe off Michigan Avenue. Charlotte didn't flinch. She decided it was time to face the mistress again. This time with steel in her spine and a legal arsenal ready to strike. When she arrived at the minimalist cafe, she spotted Camille instantly. Designer blouse, glossy hair, and an untouched espresso in a white porcelain cup. The moment Charlotte slid into the opposite seat, the air bristled with unspoken hostility. "You're late," Camille snapped, setting her cup down a little too hard. Charlotte crossed her legs, her expression smooth as glass. "I'm here now, let's get to the point." Camille didn't bother with niceties. "Graham wants this divorce finalized, but you're dragging it out. Why? Do you like tormenting him?" A cool smile tugged at Charlotte's lips. "What I enjoy is irrelevant. This marriage won't end on your timeline, Camille." Camille's perfectly shaped brow lifted, her confidence flickering into annoyance. "He's mine now. You're just the wife on paper." Charlotte laughed, soft and dismissive. "Let's see if he stays so eager when the attorneys start their work. By the time I'm through, you and Graham may be scraping pennies together, if you're lucky." Camille's eyes darkened, her voice low and furious. "Money isn't my only reason for this. I care about him." "Spare me the fairy tale," Charlotte cut in, her tone like frost. "If this were just about love, you wouldn't be threatening me at every turn. But fine. If you truly care, tell Graham to grow a spine and ask for the divorce himself. Until then, stay out of my affairs." Camille's hand smacked the table, rattling her cup. A few nearby customers paused mid-sip, drawn by the rising tension at the corner table. Camille leaned in, voice dripping venom. "You think you're untouchable because of your father's name? Your fancy lawyers? I'll drag your reputation through every tabloid in Chicago if I have to." Charlotte leaned forward too, her voice barely above a whisper but lethal all the same. "Try it. You'll find out just how deep the mud can get, Camille." Camille's glare could have scorched straight through the polished oak tabletop. She opened her mouth, then closed it, words failing her for once. Sensing she'd struck a nerve, Charlotte straightened, smoothing an invisible crease on her coat. "This conversation is over. Keep playing your little games if you want, but don't expect me to play by your rules." Without waiting for an answer, she turned on her heel and walked out, each step a quiet echo of her new, ironclad resolve. If Camille thought threats and gossip would scare her off, she was about to learn how wrong she was. Back home that evening, Charlotte received unexpected news. Her father, Richard Whitmore, had quietly tasked a trusted contact to dig into Camille's past. The findings were more damning than she'd imagined. Camille wasn't just an opportunistic socialite. She had a history, affairs with wealthy, connected men, always leaving behind broken engagements and discreet hush-money settlements. None of her past conquests, however, had been as high-profile as Graham Alden. Even more telling, Richard uncovered records showing Camille had racked up massive personal debt right before latching on to Graham. This was no accidental fling. It was a calculated pattern, securing financial safety through seduction and leverage. A sick swirl of disgust and cautious relief twisted in Charlotte's chest. This gave her ammunition, real leverage. She didn't waste a second, forwarding everything to Elizabeth Ashcroft. Elizabeth replied within the hour. Her email laid out in neat bullet points how Camille's history of manipulative relationships and hidden debts could be used to dismantle any claim she had on Graham's fortune. But the true shock came later that night. When Elizabeth called directly, her voice urgent. "There's more, Charlotte. Our private investigator found evidence, phone logs, credit card charges, suggesting Camille may be blackmailing Graham. She's threatened to leak sensitive information about his business dealings unless he finalizes the divorce quickly." A chill spread through Charlotte's veins. It explained so much. Graham's paranoia about leaks, the frantic meetings, the sudden urgency to keep Camille quiet. If she had access to confidential documents, he'd be desperate to keep her on a short leash. The puzzle pieces clicked together, revealing a picture far worse than an ordinary affair. This was extortion, hidden behind a silk dress and a coy smile. Camille was no mere scorned mistress. She was an opportunist, cunning, shameless, and now Charlotte couldn't shake the feeling that there was more beneath the surface. Some deeper rot in Graham's world that he'd hidden even from her. She confronted him that night in their living room. Soft lamplight cast fractured shadows over the polished floors and elegant furnishings, but nothing could soften the tension clawing at the air between them. "I know about Camille's blackmail," Charlotte said, her voice just shaky enough to betray how deeply this cut her. "She's threatening to expose your business deals, isn't she?" Graham's eyes flew wide. "How? Who told you?" She lifted a hand, cutting him off coldly. "Doesn't matter. What matters is you've risked everything we built because you couldn't keep your ego or anything else in check." His expression twisted, half guilt, half raw frustration. "I'm trying to handle it, but she's out of control. She got her hands on files connected to a major merger. If she leaks it, I could be charged with securities fraud." Charlotte's stomach dropped. This was worse than she'd feared. How did she even get access? Graham raked both hands through his hair, pacing like a man cornered. "She dug through my briefcase, hacked my emails apparently. She's not just some reckless fling, she's smart, smarter than I gave her credit for." Charlotte stood frozen, absorbing every brutal word. Then something hardened inside her, cold, focused. "You need to come clean. File for a restraining order. Bring in the authorities if you have to. I won't stand by while she holds our entire world hostage." Graham shook his head so hard it bordered on panic. "No, you don't get it. If the police or the SEC start sniffing around, every document I've touched will be dissected. Even the smallest error could ruin me, ruin us." For a heartbeat, her fury faltered. Charlotte knew what it meant. The Alden wealth wasn't just vanity. It funded their philanthropic work, supported employees, even paid for community grants and scholarships. If Graham's empire fell, so would all the people tied to it. She stepped closer, voice low and clear. "Then what's your plan, Graham? Just let Camille keep squeezing you dry?" He stared at her helplessly, sweat beading near his temple. "I need time. To get the files back somehow. To stop her. But she's demanding I sign the divorce papers right now. She thinks if I make you leave, she'll have more leverage." Charlotte's eyes narrowed, her voice edged with steel. "So she's extorting you to force me out, and you're really going to let her?" Graham's voice cracked under the weight of his own mess. I don't know, Charlotte." She regarded him coolly as if seeing him fully for the first time. "If you cave to her now," Charlotte said icily, "then forget my help keeping this quiet. And trust me, if I walk away, everything else you're clinging to will come down with me." Graham's shoulders sagged, stripped of his practiced composure. "Then help me, Char. You've always been the sharpest person I know. If we can't involve the police, we need something else, something to force her hand." Charlotte drew a deep breath, a riot of feelings crashing inside her. Even after all the betrayal, she couldn't ignore the memory of the partnership they once were. Two people who'd built something remarkable together. She had no desire to watch him lose it all to Camille's games. "Fine," she said at last, her voice quiet but unyielding. "But you'll do exactly what I say." A week later, after discreet planning with Elizabeth Ashcroft and her father Richard, Charlotte and Graham orchestrated a trap that had to look perfectly genuine. They arranged a meeting at a private suite in the Waldorf Astoria, Chicago, known for its impeccable privacy and old-money luxury. Word was leaked, just carefully enough, that a settlement was being finalized, and Graham intended to ensure Charlotte walked away with as little as possible. The bait was set. Camille arrived at the suite, brimming with smug satisfaction, draped in a sleek black cocktail dress that shimmered with each step. She practically glowed with triumph when she caught sight of the slim stack of paperwork waiting on the coffee table, though she tried to mask it with a bored flick of her hair. Graham stood by the tall window, the city lights reflecting off the glass behind him. He looked tense, drained. Charlotte sat on a velvet sofa, head bowed slightly, the perfect picture of a defeated wife. "Well, isn't this cozy?" Camille purred, shutting the door behind her. "I trust everything's in order?" Graham nodded stiffly, gesturing to the paperwork. "Charlotte and I have agreed on the terms. She's ready to finalize the divorce quietly." Camille's eyes darted between them, something calculating flashing beneath her confident smirk. "And the merger files, Graham? Don't forget who's holding your future in their pretty little hands." He swallowed, glancing briefly at Charlotte before nodding. "That's part of the deal. You'll get the transfer and the claims, just as soon as this is done. Charlotte forced out a weary sigh. Let's just get this over with. Camille glided closer, eyeing the documents with open greed. She shot Charlotte a venomous smile. Did you really think you could keep him with your money and that uptight charm? You can't buy passion, sweetheart. Maybe next time, learn how to please your man. The barb sliced deep, but Charlotte's expression didn't so much as flicker. She calmly picked up the pen, hand steady. Behind her, Graham turned to the bar, fumbling with the whiskey decanter, his hand visibly trembling. Then, in one smooth movement, Charlotte swapped the top sheet with an entirely different set of papers, her trap falling perfectly into place. Camille's attention flickered to her phone, fingers tapping out what was likely a gleeful message to some confidant, bragging about the prize she thought she'd just snatched away. She didn't notice Charlotte calmly signing a document that wasn't what it appeared to be. Elizabeth Ashcroft had prepared this particular set of papers with surgical precision. It held no legal weight for dissolving the marriage, but was instead crafted as a clever snare. Buried in the legalese was a subtle yet binding admission of Camille's threats, extortion, and unauthorized access to Graham's confidential files. Charlotte set the pen down with an air of weary surrender and pushed it across the table. Fine. Let's be thorough. I want your signature too, acknowledging that in exchange for my quiet departure, you waive any accusations against me, now or in the future. Camille frowned, skimming the paragraphs half-heartedly. The dense legal language made her eyelids droop, but the bolded, underlined heading, Settlement Agreement, was all she needed to feel certain of her triumph. Confidence gleamed in her eyes. Inside, Charlotte's pulse thudded so hard she could feel it echo in her throat, but her face stayed perfectly serene. She forced herself to hold Camille's smug gaze, burying a thrill of satisfaction deep beneath her composed exterior. This was her moment. Finally, she would watch the woman who'd tried to steal everything walk straight into her own trap. She had won, or so she believed. With a satisfied flick of her wrist, Camille signed her name with a flourish. Barely had the pen left the page when a knock echoed through the suite. The door swung open to reveal Elizabeth Ashcroft, Richard Whitmore beside her, flanked by two sharply dressed security consultants. Camille's head snapped up, her smug expression dissolving into startled alarm. What the hell is this? Elizabeth advanced with a calm, lethal grace. Thank you, Miss Graham. We have precisely what we need. She plucked the freshly signed document from the table, scanning it with a pleased nod. Camille's eyes darted wildly from Graham to Charlotte, dread replacing her false bravado. You tricked me. You? Charlotte's lips curved into the faintest hint of a victorious smile, her eyes never leaving Camille's panicked face. Graham stepped forward, voice heavy with a remorse he didn't bother to hide. I'm sorry, Camille, but you left us no other choice. Elizabeth faced Camille directly, her tone crisp as a judge's gavel. The document you just signed is not a divorce agreement. It's a formal statement acknowledging your role in threatening this marriage and illegally accessing Mr. Alden's confidential business information, among other acts. She tapped the page for emphasis. It includes a sworn affidavit of malicious intent. You've effectively admitted to blackmail, Miss Graham. All the color drained from Camille's face. You can't do this. This is entrapment. Elizabeth raised a single, cold eyebrow. On the contrary, you came here of your own free will, believing you had coerced Charlotte and Graham into your terms. I assure you the courts will see it the same way. Now we have written, signed proof of your extortion attempts, Elizabeth said evenly. Camille scrambled for her purse, likely reaching for her phone, but one of the suited security men stepped in, blocking her path with calm authority. We'll need that, Miss Graham. Charlotte watched her with a mixture of cold relief and the last embers of raw anger still smoldering in her chest. She stood slowly, smoothing the front of her tailored skirt. You threatened to tear my life apart. You tried to force my hand. Now you'll live with the consequences. Camille's wild eyes darted desperately to Graham. You can't let them do this. You love me. Graham's face twisted, guilt and exhaustion weighing on every word. His hands shook at his sides. I made a mistake, Camille. I never loved you. I was weak. But I won't let you destroy Charlotte or me any longer. The last flicker of false hope died in Camille's expression. She lunged for the coffee table, grabbing at the stack of merger files she still believed were her ace in the hole, only to find blank pages. A decoy. Her face contorted in pure rage, but the security team stepped closer, cutting off any escape. Elizabeth's voice was cool as frost. You can choose to quietly surrender any real stolen material and sign a non-disclosure agreement. In return, we may decide not to pursue the maximum charges. Resist, and I promise the evidence we have will bury you in court. Camille's fury fractured into a silent, trembling defeat. She collapsed back into a chair, the weight of reality crashing down around her. Charlotte watched every second of Camille's collapse, feeling a sharp, almost feral satisfaction twist low in her chest. But under the surface, exhaustion flooded in too, a bone-deep ache for every sleepless night, every betrayal she'd had to swallow just to stand here today. The part of her that longed for vengeance felt sated. The part that longed for peace felt impossibly tired. Graham moved hesitantly to Charlotte's side. For a moment, their eyes met. Two people acknowledging the wreckage they now stood among. Charlotte drew herself upright, refusing to let any flicker of misplaced sympathy soften the truth of what had been done to her. The woman who once smirked so brazenly now sat shaking, her future reduced to nothing but an ugly cautionary tale. Karma, swift and merciless, had arrived. With Camille cornered and her blackmail scheme neutralized, Elizabeth and Richard oversaw her removal from the suite, escorting her to a private room where she'd be forced to hand over any remaining stolen files. If she cooperated, she'd leave with scraps. If not, prison was waiting. Charlotte stood motionless, arms folded tightly across her chest. The suite felt cavernous, strangely hollow now that the storm had passed. Graham lingered by the window, his shoulders hunched, the confident spark in his eyes dulled and weary. Deep stress lines carved into his face told the rest of the story. A king stripped down to a man who nearly lost everything. When the door finally closed behind Camille and the others, silence swallowed the room. Charlotte crossed to the sofa and sank down gracefully, pressing a trembling hand to her forehead. Relief hummed under her skin. She'd won. But victory, she realized, could still taste like ashes. Graham turned toward her slowly, eyes filled with a regret so raw it seemed to age him right there in the soft lamplight. Charlotte, I don't even know what to say. She lifted her gaze, exhaustion shadowing her features. Then don't say anything. You got what you wanted. Camille won't ruin your deals, and I won't be dragged through a humiliating divorce, publicly at least. He moved closer, cautious, as if afraid he might break her further by proximity alone. He sat down beside her, clasping his hands in his lap. The damage I caused is beyond forgiveness, but for what it's worth. I see now how badly I took you for granted. Camille was never worth losing you. Charlotte stared at him, blinking against the sting at the corners of her eyes. You lost me the moment you chose her. Everything we just did, it was to protect what little dignity I had left. And yes, a part of me still cares. But don't mistake that for forgiveness. A dull ache pressed behind her ribs, a part of her screaming to ask why he hadn't seen her worth before tearing them apart. She forced the words back, refusing to let fresh hurt muddy her resolve. He had to feel every ounce of the cost. Pain flickered across Graham's face, a fresh wound he knew he'd carved himself. I understand. She drew in a long breath, gathering the last shreds of her composure. We've neutralized the threat. Now comes the real question. What happens next? Do we actually try to piece this marriage back together, or has too much been broken? He hesitated, voice trembling on the edge of hope and defeat. I want to fix this, but only if you want to. Charlotte closed her eyes, exhaustion pressing into her bones. Graham, you shattered my trust. Even if I stay, I can't pretend this will ever be what it once was. And the most terrifying truth of all, she still wanted to believe him. Some soft, stubborn piece of her heart longed to find the man she'd married, buried beneath all the lies. That weakness shamed her almost as much as his betrayal. In the quiet between them, she hated how her heart still recognized the warmth in his eyes. A warmth she'd once trusted more than her own instincts. She needed him to understand that trust was of a fortress rebuilt brick by brick, not begged back overnight. Tentatively, he reached for her hand. For a heartbeat, she let him hold it, remembering softer days, promises whispered under city lights. Then, gently, she pulled away. In the days that followed Camille's downfall, Elizabeth confirmed that Camille had grudgingly surrendered every stolen file to avoid prosecution. She'd signed an airtight NDA, forfeiting any chance to sue and forced to accept a modest hush payment, a pittance compared to what she'd schemed to gain. With Camille gone, the city buzzed with hushed speculation. Rumors of a mistress floated in whispered corners, but no concrete evidence surfaced. Graham's company survived unscathed, the scandal dissolving almost as quickly as it had erupted. Yet for Charlotte, the hardest part remained, deciding whether to stay. Rebuilding trust with Graham seemed insurmountable. She weighed every option, consulting Elizabeth, confiding in her father Richard, and listening to her closest friends, who offered everything from fierce calls to leave him forever to gentle encouragement for counseling. Then, one evening, Graham surprised her. He asked her to meet him at the very place where, all those years ago, they'd first whispered "I love you." It was a weathered bench in Lincoln Park, near the conservatory garden, where he'd once promised her forever under blooming spring magnolias. When she arrived, she found the bench adorned with a bouquet of fresh white roses, lit softly by the glow of an old lamppost. Standing there, Graham met her eyes. No mask, no armor, just a man stripped bare. "I know," he said, voice breaking. "I don't deserve a second chance. Not really." He began, voice trembling but unwavering. "I need you to hear me, Charlotte. You mean more to me than every business deal, every fleeting thrill. I was arrogant, stupid. I threw away our marriage for something worthless." She stayed silent, letting him pour it out. "I'd do anything to make it right," Graham said, desperation threading through every word. "If you want a legal separation, I won't fight it. If you want counseling, I'll go. If you want me to pull back from the company to be more present, I will. I'm begging you to consider trying, not for what we were, but for what we could still be." Charlotte's eyes shimmered with tears she refused to let fall. "You can't undo what you did. Love alone isn't enough. It needs respect. It needs honesty. You broke both." He stepped closer, voice cracking. "Give me time to earn them back. I know it won't happen overnight. I'm prepared to fight for you, as long as it takes." A quiet war raged in her chest, between a heart that still knew his touch and a mind that refused to forget every lie, every stolen night. Part of her wanted to believe him, to surrender to the familiar comfort of old promises. But another part, stronger now, braced itself. Forgiveness would not be a gift handed over easily. He would have to carve it out, one truth at a time. And buried beneath her armor, an older fear throbbed awake. What if he failed her again? What if she opened the door just enough for him to tear her apart a second time? The thought terrified her more than being alone ever could. For a fragile moment, Charlotte's mind slipped back to the man she fell for. The one who used to call her from red-eye flights just to say he missed her, who scribbled silly notes and tucked them into her coat pocket. She had always believed people could change, if they truly wanted to, but trust didn't grow back overnight. "I'm not saying yes," she whispered, voice barely carrying over the breeze in the park. "But I'm not saying no either. You'll have to prove it. Every day. Show me the man I fell in love with." Graham nodded, tears in his own eyes now, unashamed. "I will. I swear it." With the storm finally behind her, Charlotte found a new clarity, a reason to turn her scars into something stronger. She poured her energy, her inheritance, and her hard-earned wisdom into launching a foundation to empower other women who found themselves manipulated, silenced, or trapped. She named it the Aurora Foundation, symbolizing the dawn after the darkest night. At the gala launch held at the Art Institute of Chicago, Charlotte took the stage in a breathtaking gold gown that shimmered under the museum's spotlights. The audience, a sea of philanthropists, entrepreneurs, and city leaders, fell silent as she began. Too often, women are left voiceless and powerless, financially and emotionally. Tonight, I stand here not as a victim, but as proof that we can reclaim our power. She paused, her voice steady, resolute. The Aurora Foundation will provide legal aid, seed funding for female entrepreneurs, and mentorship programs. We want to ensure that no woman stays in a destructive situation because she feels she has no choice. From tonight on, she will always have options. The applause that rose in answer thundered through the marble hall. In the front row, Graham watched her, pride and lingering sorrow tangled in his eyes. painfully aware of the strength he'd almost destroyed. As Charlotte stepped down from the podium, she felt it, a freedom, a future that belonged to her alone, no matter what came next. He approached her tentatively when the final round of applause faded into soft murmurs. "That was incredible," Graham said quietly, his voice touched with something like awe. "I'm proud of you, truly." Charlotte offered him a polite, almost distant smile. "This is something I should have done long ago. Maybe I just needed the right storm to push me." He reached out to gently squeeze her hand, a small, hopeful gesture. But she drew back subtly, ever mindful of the watchful eyes around them. They stood together in public now, but between them stretched a careful, fragile expanse neither could cross too quickly. Yet the Aurora Foundation's triumph opened a horizon Charlotte had once only dreamed of. She was no longer just Mrs. Alden, the polished socialite wife behind a powerful man. She was her own force now, capable of standing alone if she had to. And if Graham truly wanted to remain in that future, he'd have to earn the right. Months later, word trickled back to Charlotte about Camille. She had tried, predictably, to ensnare another wealthy target, but her infamy preceded her. The NDA she'd signed muzzled her tongue, but couldn't salvage her ruined name. No high-profile man wanted the stain of a known blackmailer on his arm. Her posh apartment was gone, the hush money drying up fast. Rumors floated that she was couch surfing with an old friend, jobless, broke, and unwelcome. Once the predator, now the pariah. Karma had done its work thoroughly. Meanwhile, Charlotte's own life took on a momentum she hadn't dared envision before. The Aurora Foundation launched its first series of leadership workshops, helping women claim their place at corporate tables. Invitations for her to speak rolled in from conferences across the country. Each stage another reminder that her voice, once nearly drowned, now rang louder than ever. At home, Graham kept his promise. Therapy, both alone and with her, week after week. He had grown quieter, softer. Sometimes he waited up for her late at night with tea, asking, genuinely, about her day. Little by little, she allowed him these gentle gestures of penance. But her heart remained under lock and key, guarded until time and truth proved they belonged together again, if they ever did. Some nights, alone in the soft hush of her bedroom, Charlotte would lie awake tracing old memories like ghostly scars beneath her ribs. Forgiveness, she realized, was not a door she could fling wide open. It was a door Graham would have to knock on, again and again, until she was sure she could stand behind it without fear. They found, instead, a cautious companionship. A truce built not on illusions, but on fragile honesty and a renewed respect for each other's ambitions. Whether their marriage would heal completely, neither could say. But they both knew redemption would never come cheap. One quiet evening, Charlotte found herself back in her favorite nook by the bay window. The setting sun washed the Chicago skyline in hues of amber and rose. She rested her hand against the glass, her mind drifting back through every betrayal, every moment of rage and quiet cunning, and finally to the iron-edged triumph she'd carved for herself. She had lost and regained everything that mattered most: her voice, her power, and her unwavering sense of self. And whatever tomorrow brought, she knew this much: she would never lose them again. The cost had been steep, but Charlotte emerged stronger, wiser. She learned the hardest truth of all. Love without respect is just a fragile illusion waiting to shatter. And no matter how dark the storm, true power often rises when you're backed against the wall with nothing left but your resolve. So that's where this story closes, my incredible friends. Are you still here with me right now? If you are, then maybe, just maybe, something in Charlotte's journey has touched your heart too. Sometimes life tears us apart right at the seams we thought were unbreakable. Sometimes betrayal leaves us gasping for air in our own home, among our own people. But as the Stoic philosopher Epictetus reminds us, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Charlotte's strength didn't come from being unhurt, it came from standing tall, despite the hurt. Maybe you too have faced days when trust crumbled, when your worth felt invisible, when you wanted to disappear. And maybe you're learning, like Charlotte did, that your power is yours alone. No betrayal can steal it forever. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Charlotte didn't just fight a mistress and a cheating husband. She fought the lies she once told herself. That she was only worthy if she kept everyone happy. That silence was safer than standing up. In the end, she reclaimed her voice and turned her scars into a foundation to lift others. So tonight, if you're still here, I hope you carry this truth into tomorrow. You are never just what they say about you. You are never just someone's ornament. You are the whole masterpiece, flaws, storms, and all. If this story kept you reading until this final word, then help us keep telling more stories that remind us all how resilient the human spirit can be. Click like, share this with someone who needs courage tonight, and subscribe so you don't miss the next tale that might just change your perspective. From my heart to yours, thank you for staying until the end. May you always find the power to rewrite your own ending.